I'm honored tonight to introduce City Councilmember Kshama Sawant. Her 15 months on the council have been at once both a breath of fresh air and a tornado for social justice. Her office provides a powerful focal point for the organizations and advocacy groups in the greater Seattle area. Kshama's work comes from the real existing needs of working and poor people, economic needs and demands, and the right to engage in the democratic process without fear of retaliation or rebuke, and the fundamental right to live a dignified, healthy, and productive life. From these principles, her political work takes shape and finds its voice in action. It's no big surprise that the 1%, including the Democratic Party, by way of the Urban League, is targeting Kshama for defeat this next election. Kshama said recently, "Coming after me means they are coming after all of you, us, the working people who mobilized for her campaign and then for issue after issue at the City Council." Kshama brings integrity and detail to legislation. The $15 an hour was the centerpiece of her campaign. Then in office, to push for passage, she organized marches and demonstrations. Within the council, she fought hard against including loopholes and made council members publicly state their reasoning when they voted in favor of these loopholes. After the bill for 15 passed in Seattle, Kshama was arrested for civil disobedience at SeaTac, drawing attention to Alaska Airlines' refusal to pay $15 an hour. And this afternoon, she organized volunteers to be back in the streets, educating workers on how they have to enforce their own right to 15 because the city has failed to provide an enforcement structure, even though legislation takes effect in only 3 days on April 1st. So I'm glad that Kshama doesn't just pass a bill and wash her hands of it, but follows through until the intention is indeed a reality. It's about time. Thank you. Please join me in welcoming Kshama.
Re-elect Kshama.
Thank you all, sisters and brothers, for being here, and for the speakers who preceded me, and especially the inspiring story from Vermont. And I think beyond inspiration, the lessons that we can learn, how their success was based on building, as James said, a people's movement. And I thank Sally for that really generous introduction, although I am humbled because she is an activist that I look up to. So I guess we inspire each other. All of us do that. And I wanted to, I wanted to start by saying that if public mandate were the decider, then we should have had single-payer healthcare decades ago. And so the question that we should explore is why we don't have it. And just to give, just a glimpse, I know everybody in this room is on the same page, but just to give an idea of what that public mandate looked like for years and still looks like, a majority of the population at that time that Obama was discussing reform for healthcare was on the side of single-payer healthcare or a strong public option. And forgetting the details aside, if you go to any ordinary rational human being who has the interest of themselves and their families and their community at heart, and you ask them, don't you think that this kind of social service, healthcare is such a basic need, should be socially shared, and that the people at the top should be paying the most, and we, the workers who make the city run, should be getting it for free, and our children should be able to have that, our elderly parents should be able to have that. Without a doubt, people are going to say yes. And it's not only ordinary people and workers and their families, it's a great number of physicians and nurses who've been on our side and who've been fierce and courageous advocates of this. And as a matter of fact, I mentioned that specifically also because in preparation for tonight, I asked Valentina Warner, who's a physician, can you wave? Yeah. And a good friend of mine, to write me a few words on what she thinks as a community clinic physician and the impacts of Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, on her patients. She's a dedicated doctor, and her passion runs so deep that she gave me a long essay that I cannot read here. But I will be posting it on my council blog. But I urge you all to read this because it is a heartfelt account full of nitty-gritty of what it means to be a doctor. You go in the morning and you try to service your patients and the enormous obstacles that they're faced with. And she particularly points out the major loophole that happened where Medicaid ended up adopting for-profit insurance companies. And she mentions that Forbes cited one of them, United Healthcare, their CEO, as the 8th highest paid CEO in this country. It really highlights the depth of the problem. And as many people have already recognized, in 2000, this is just one statistic, there would have been over 83,000 fewer deaths of black people had we had some sort of public health care. As Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, in her scathing dissent on the Hobby Lobby case, said, the cost of an IUD is nearly equivalent to a month's full-time pay for workers earning the minimum wage, many of whom are women. And it could cost more than $1,000 out of pocket. So if you look at these stark numbers and you look at all the mandate that we have from people, from healthcare providers, we should have had this already. So the question we should focus on is, why don't we have it? What went wrong, and what should we be doing in the coming months and years? And I think just to lay out the overall picture of what happened in Washington, D.C. at that time, we saw the Republican Party and the insurance industry, the insurance lobby, going on an all-out war, a public war against the very idea of public health care. And they did that even though they knew that the deal that was coming was actually going to enrich them. Why did they do that? They denounced government-run insurance as un-American, as socialist, although they're right about that. It is a socialist thing. But they also called it treacherous. They organized AstroTurf campaigns. And why did they do that? They did that because had they just accepted, yeah, we're going to get lots of good things from Obama anyway, so we can stay out of it, then they would have allowed the space for the activist movements to strike back and get enough room to organize and get some good things into the bill. What they did was completely suck out the air so that there was absolutely no question. There was no question. Single payer was off the table. And by contrast, what did the Democrats do? The Democratic Party establishment, which controlled both the legislative and executive branches at that time, they allowed the Republicans to dictate the agenda, and they did what they always do best, which is silence their left flank, and they kept moving their agenda to the right. And I know that is always presented as, well, they lack a spine. And they need to be coaxed into it. I also, in today's discussion, there was a question of how do we persuade our political representative, our elected officials. I would say that the reality is not that they lack a political will. They do have political will. It's just that they're not fighting for us. And to be clear, there are many genuine people who run as elected officials under the Democratic Party banner. Remember Dennis Kucinich? And there are millions of people who identify themselves as Democratic Party supporters, but have zero say in the agenda of the Democratic Party. When was the last time any of us who say we support the Democratic Party invited to a meeting to discuss policy, healthcare or otherwise? And I think that the most important step that the single-payer movement should take, and it's already taking, is to recognize that bitter fact that as long as we have our hips tied to the Democratic Party establishment, we will not win single-payer healthcare. And if we need hard evidence of which way or which side the interest, the loyalty of the Democratic Party lies to, look at the historically high campaign contributions Obama got on his presidential campaign from Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, all of those heroes who sunk the global economy almost on the brink of an abyss. These are the people behind the White House and US Congress. But we have to remember, activists who are on the forefront have to remember, we should not be going to the establishment for our approval or for mandate. We're never going to get that. We should go to where our strength lies, at the grassroots, people who are disenfranchised and left completely out of the system, but will be on your side if you go to them for power. And that is the approach of independent politics. The approach which says that on a purely statistical basis, if you look at what's happened in the last several decades, the labor movement, all the progressive organizations, the environmental movement, all those people who stand for social, racial, and economic justice and for environmental sustainability have poured hundreds of millions of dollars into the Democratic Party establishment, pulled out hundreds of thousands of foot soldiers every time a campaign comes around. And we have nothing to show for it other than a systematic string of betrayals. And that is why I think the most important message we have to take to the people that we are trying to empower, the people on the ground, working families, is the need, and the labor movement, rank and file workers, is the urgent need to make a clean break from the Democratic Party establishment and to draw towards us those who consider themselves Democratic Party supporters, but who can see in a glaringly clear way that that party establishment does not in any way speak to the values that we all hold. And I know that Sally already mentioned what we've done in Seattle, and I'm going to go back to that in the few minutes that I have left, because I think that in addition to what James talked about in the people's movement in Vermont, these are examples, these are powerful examples of how, if you build even the mere beginnings of independent politics, you can have a raving success. Imagine what we could do if all around the nation we had a huge political momentum away from the two big business parties and to build alternate political structures for the left. And it is important to say what it is. Often people say to me, I agree with you, we need a third party. And I come from India. We have a multitude of parties, and not a single one of them represents the interests of the people I care about. And I always tell people, yes, we need a third party, but it matters what kind it is. We don't want the Tea Party, obviously. I wasn't meaning to joke, but but that begs the question, what is it are we looking for then? And that is why I'm going to use our own campaign, my own campaign. I say our because I don't see this as something that belongs to me or was done by me exclusively. This was a collective effort, as anything always is when you talk about social justice. But I go back to this example because it was such a clear example of what independent politics looks like. I called myself an open socialist. You don't have to do that. But what we did by using that relentlessly on the campaign, people kept asking me, why do you always have to start a speech by saying I am a socialist? Because there was a rational fear in people's minds. After the Cold War propaganda, people thought, don't say you're a socialist, that's just going to doom your campaign. But we on the left, people who are here because you've been on the forefront of struggle for so long, it's important for us to realize it's a different world out there. The younger generation has nothing invested in this system, in the capitalist system, or in the elected officials that are littered around the political landscape. What the young people see is a system that is not working for them. They have entered a world in which capitalism is in its deepest recession since the Great Depression. There is no solution within capitalism on the horizon for this deep, deep international crisis. They see their lives being sort of engulfed in a darkness of low-wage jobs, student debt, and a really uninspiring dead-end kind of life unless they engage in struggle. And they are looking for us. They are looking to struggle. And that is what we discovered through our campaign, that as a matter of fact, the conventional wisdom that you have to run a mild campaign and that you have to be very careful is not going to appeal to the people who want to fight with you. And what we did was lay out a framework for what an independent political campaign looks like. We said, this is a purely grassroots campaign. We take zero money from corporations. It was incredible how powerful that idea was. I mean, to me as a socialist, it seems, very obvious and straightforward. There is no way I would ever take money from corporations. Not that they're dying to give me any money, because they're also rational. But in the context of this dystopian politics where it is completely, bathed in corrupt corporate politics, the idea of running a strong grassroots campaign that boldly declares, I'm not taking a penny from corporations, is so inspiring to people. That's the kind of campaigns we need. Campaigns where we don't worry about what is going to upset the corporate establishment of the local jurisdiction where you're running. And that's very important, because we often talk about Republicans, but Seattle does not really have a Republican Party to speak of.
Right.
Thank goodness.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you. But if you look at the situation of people in Seattle, mired in low wages, with a deepening crisis in housing affordability, and with a city council and a mayor's office that has systematically worked in the interests of corporate developers, and more of the inches of our land being taken over by Vulcan and Amazon.com, at whose doorstep does this scenario lie? It lies at the doorstep of the Democratic Party establishment. And that's very important for us to recognize, because it gives us a real opportunity to engage with people and say, this is what we're fighting against. We're fighting for a real idea of representing, a real representation for ordinary working people, a real representation for those who are marginalized, women, people of color, especially the Black community, communities of color, the Latino community, the immigrant community. We are showing that, and I mentioned even the mere beginnings can strike fear into the hearts of the establishment and show actual results. With 1 year, and Sally said, around 15 months in City Hall, we have showed that having even one person, one elected official that has truly emerged from mass campaigns and mass movements and is truly accountable to our collective interests, even having one person has completely changed the political landscape of Seattle. And as Sally correctly said, that is precisely why they are going to go into all-out war against us this year. And the way they will do it is, of course, by isolating me and by casting personal slurs. But we have to remember that if we are here in order to fight effectively for single-payer healthcare and win the victories, and as everybody before me said, if you're fighting for single-payer healthcare, then you're fighting for all kinds of justice, because how can you fight for one and not fight for the other? All these are interconnected. And for that purpose, in order to achieve those victories, not only in terms of strong social reforms, but raising people's vision towards a systemic change, in order to do that, we have to ensure that we protect the gains of what we won here, build on it this year, and then have that be a sort of an electrifying impact on everybody. I guarantee you, if we win in November, it is going to have an earth-shattering impact internationally. But that's not important in itself. What's important about it is two things. One, the opportunity that it gives us to fight for further strong reforms in Seattle, but not just that, the opportunity to raise the morale of hundreds of thousands of people around us and to present the idea, a real concrete idea of independent politics, not in theory, but in practice. And I hope that you will all be with me all throughout this year and in the coming years forward. Thank you.